Hi, I'm Southampton Town Supervisor Jay Schneiderman, and welcome to Talk of the Town, where we take a close look at issues affecting our community. Today we're going to be talking about water quality issues, and in particular we're going to be looking at a new program the town of Southampton has introduced to help remove nitrogen from our septic systems. And I'm joined by Councilman John Bouvier, and also with Janice Shearer, who is our Assistant Planning Director, and also in kind of leading our long-range planning efforts. So thank you both for coming on Talk of the Town. I think people read in the papers about algal tides, algal blooms, the red tide, or the brown tide, rust tide. Seems like rainbow colors, all the colors. And these are these large growths of algae that tend to really reduce water quality in the bays and harbors. And the fingers are always pointing to nitrogen, and a lot of it seems to be coming from residential sanitary systems. So when people use their traditional systems, which are a septic tank and a cesspool, and they flush the toilet, off it goes, and those systems it's an old technology. It's really not much of a technology. It's really designed more for controlling pathogens than protecting our water resources. And so it basically traps the solids and allows the liquids to go right back in without removing any nitrogen. So now there are newer technologies that remove that nitrogen. And that's sort of the direction the town seems to be going. John, do you want to talk about that a little bit, the newer technologies?
Sure. The issue is that nitrogen is a fertilizer, in a sense. It feeds the algal blooms that we hear a lot about. And most of that nitrogen is captured in urine. And it takes a long time for it to get through the groundwater and ultimately gets into the water. So about 65% of the nitrogen contribution, it's estimated, comes from septic systems. About 20% from fertilizer, and the rest is atmospheric deposition. So what you're breathing right now is nitrogen gas. So a lot of these systems are designed to convert that to a gas that it is released back into the system. So there's various methods of removing nitrogen, some very complex, some you've probably heard the term PRB. Basically, it's a filter that captures and allows the organic processes to take place to convert.
So that PRB stands for permeable reactive barrier.
Yeah.
So
it's really what happened,
right,
all the time when you had a hole in the ground with an outhouse. It was basically the soil system would make those conversions over a period of time. But because
so is that why? So we have obviously a lot of wildlife here, raccoons and deer and geese. So I mean, typically, when they excrete waste, it goes through a biological process before it enters the drinking water because it's on the top layer.
Right.
And there are organisms within soil, right, that take that nitrogen and they convert it to that gaseous form.
Yeah, I mean, we as human beings, we dig a hole and we bypass the topsoil and we bypass
right. So
that
we take the oxygen
system
sort of out of the environment,
yeah,
and those organic matter out of the environment.
Right. And you'll hear sort of two words used, aerobic and anaerobic processes. That's basically one with oxygen and one without. So the complex, you were a chemist, and the complex chemical characteristics that are contained in a soil system are, generally can handle the waste of small areas or animals and so forth. But it's when we begin to get the density that we have now that we get a lot more nitrogen, that not just coming from human beings, but also coming from all the lawn care products and things like that. Some of it's agricultural legacy. They used to use phosphorus as a base, phosphates as a base for fertilizing. That fertilizer would run into some of our freshwater ponds as well. But by and large, that 20% is coming from lawn care products that contain nitrogen and from septic systems. So the new systems, typically an average household puts out, and you can go on our website and see, you can actually calculate, because not all homes produce the same amount of nitrogen. It depends on what you consume and what you're eating and so forth. But ultimately, we use an estimate of around 40 to 50 milligrams per liter. So it's 50 milligrams of nitrate in a liter of water.
So in terms of septic system, sanitary system designs, that's kind of at the county level. The health department really is the entity that's in charge. And they've been telling us for years what type of systems we need to install. Though some of the, in the early days, 1950s, around then, people weren't even putting in septic tanks. They were just putting in these rings. And then they started capturing the solids. And my recollection, in the 70s, there was a growing concern about nitrogen in drinking water, but it had nothing to do with fertilizing the bays. It had to do with a condition, blue baby syndrome is a name for that.
Blue baby syndrome.
Yeah. And that they were trying to keep the nitrogen levels in drinking water down below 10 milligrams per liter because they were concerned about health impacts. It wasn't, I think, until much more recently that we started realizing that the nitrogen, though it might be okay for human consumption in the drinking water, was way too high for the bays and harbors and our marine life. And a lot of people out here not only make their living off of clams and oysters, the baymen, baywomen, but the whole marine fisheries are dependent upon healthy bays and harbors. And it's a big industry out here, and people love to recreate on the waters. And so there's a lot of compelling reasons to try to get nitrogen out. So now they have these new systems, and they go by lots of different names. And I don't know, Janice, are you familiar with some of the systems the county is allowing now?
Well, I am familiar with some of them, but I wouldn't be able to go in detail about them. I think John would be better versed at
How
them.
many are they approving? Like 4 or 5
Four
now?
right now. There's 5 on the grid, but I think one was. It's 4 right now that I know of that are generally being put in, and they based it on the Rhode Island standard of 19 milligrams per liter. So that's the measurement of nitrogen coming out. Typically, a cesspool or a septic system, without a tank, would produce 60 to 80 milligrams per liter, typically. So it's quite a reduction, but it's not a good idea, in my view, to talk about these numbers as 19 milligrams per liter. Obviously, as I said before, every septic system is different, every output is different, but we talk about percent reduction. So how much are we reducing of nitrogen that's being contributed to the system? And typically these systems are reducing about 60 to 65%. It's a really good start.
But they're a little more expensive than a standard system.
Well, they require a little power, and they average in price around $8,000 to $11,000. But obviously, there's an installation cost. So I think Janice can talk about our rebate program that we're trying to offset those costs. So we're offering $20,000, and there's a whole application process that you can go through, and Janice could talk about that. The idea behind the law was to make it available to our residents to replace these systems in these high priority zones. That's 0 to 2. So we measure 0 travel time to 2-year travel time for groundwater to make it to the bays.
So yeah, talk a little bit about that, either one of you, maybe Janice. The town actually passed a law requiring some homeowners to put in these nitrogen removing sanitary systems. Not everybody. So I was part of that, but if you could explain, and John, I know you were a lead sponsor on that, who is required to put in a nitrogen removing sanitary system?
Sure. So I just wanted to take a step back and just say these, when we say nitrogen removing systems, it's that they're able to process that nitrogen through a biological, they have bacteria that are living off of that nitrogen from the waste products. And that is why we're able to kind of use biology now in these systems where it used to just be input and let it like settle out. Now we're able to see that we can put these bacteria to good use. They can filter out the nitrogen, and then the waste that goes through, finally the sandy layers, is a lot less in this nitrogen content. So knowing this, we realize that it can't just be business as usual anymore, that we have to change the culture here, and we have to start with new homes. So that's part of the mandate. Any new home that's being constructed would be first and foremost the who has to put in these systems.
But not all new homes, right? Those that are in
the priority areas. So our method of trying to tackle this problem was to identify areas that are higher priority than others, and there's multiple factors into what creates a high priority area, but mostly it has to do with the travel time. It takes So we have to think of water that goes into the ground. It's not just going down, it's moving laterally through the ground and reaching the bay, and water moves from high to low, and it's reaching these surface
I'm not sure
waters.
that I think some people may understand that, but explain that again. So if I pour the water into the ground, it just doesn't stay below. It'll eventually go down. It goes straight
It goes down, but it also goes sideways.
It
And
doesn't go
all
sideways until it hits the water table.
True.
So there's a big pool of water beneath us,
Yes,
which we call
is
the aquifer. But it's not static. It's not just sitting there. It's actually
moving.
So as water comes in, it kind of gets pushed out, and it eventually comes out in the bays and harbors. It's working its way toward the ocean and the sound.
Right.
Well, we have a divide. We look at Long Island down the middle. So basically, in the sense, it's a pyramid. So water on one side, groundwater, travels to the northern part of the island, and water on the south side travels to the ocean side. That system itself is it also changes. Groundwater tables move up and down if you have coastal flooding and
Sure.
all sorts of things, or you over irrigate, or there's all sorts of reasons why groundwater tables move up and down, and they're very dynamic. It's not like a bathtub. It's not static. It's striations. We have basically two levels of groundwater that we use. Two different moraines.
Different
essentially.
aquifers.
Right.
There's like the Lloyd and the Magathie.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this is all because Long Island is basically formed by glaciers pushing and retreating, and so that's why you have the difference between the North Shore and sort of the sandy South Shores. But we have to think that the priority areas are where the travel time from when the water goes into the ground and gets to a surface water, a bay or a pond, is less than 2 years.
So typically it moves pretty slow, like a couple feet a year.
Some
So-
groundwater, where it hasn't reached a bay in decades, and some moves very quickly. So it depends on, and for the
So
first,
that 2-year travel time, that's typically a couple thousand feet from the bays and harbors, or
it can go fairly far inland.
Yeah, I can.
to go further than that?
It
Yeah.
depends on the composition of the soil, and right now the county and town of Southampton and other towns are working with the county to map that.
So we have our own map. So if somebody wanted to find out whether they're in this zone,
Yes, you
Yep.
can
They can
literally
look
go
that
on
up.
our website and type in your address, and it will tell you whether or not you're in the high priority area.
Okay.
And so this is a way for us to just be more systematic about, okay, let's get the biggest bang for the buck and go for the stuff that's really reaching the surface water in
yeah,
a
so if
very
somebody's building a
relatively
new
short
house, and they're
time.
gonna have to put in a brand new sanitary system anyway.
Right.
It might as well be one of these systems. We
And
also,
that's-
I think, are requiring, if somebody's doing a large addition to their home.
Correct. So that's the next level. So the first mandate is if you're building a new house in the priority area, you should just consider it business as usual, that you're going to put in an IA system from here going forward. This is the new way to approach, how we're going to manage our waste.
Some
And-
people are doing this voluntarily. They're not required. They just want to do the right thing. And maybe they're in this priority area or near this priority area, and they're saying, I want to do my part to remove contaminants, remove nitrogen. They can qualify for rebates as well. So everybody can qualify for rebates.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and it's based on our reimbursement is based on income. So there's income levels and thresholds that you can meet. So the idea was that people on fixed income, we didn't want to overly burden them with these costs. And I think it's the right thing to do. Our CPF fund is
Yeah, say
available
that
to
too.
do
So
that.
CPF is
The Community Preservation Fund,
It's a
20% of
transfer
that,
tax.
20% of that money was put aside to be used exclusively for water quality projects that the town voted. I think it was over 80% of the town voted in
And just
favor
to
of
give
doing that.
people a sense of how much money that is. So a typical year, the Community Preservation Fund brings in 50 to 60 million.
For the whole fund,
The whole fund. So, and we're saying 20%,
Right.
so about 10 million.
about 10 million.
10 to 12 million
And-
can be
and a
used
portion- I'm
for
sorry.
water quality
Right.
projects, though not exclusively for this rebate program.
That's correct.
But we have funds available if people are interested in upgrading the sanitary system, and we will give a rebate up to $20,000, right? That's or depending upon your income bracket, either 100% of the cost of the system, or 50% of the cost of the system, or 25% of the
That's
cost
right.
of the system.
And then we're also we're using also those funds right now for a process that we've just put in place, was an application for infrastructure projects. It's a loosely used term, but those are projects that aren't septic system replacement, but projects that contribute to help restoring the health of our base systems and water quality in the town of Southampton. They may include a village who wants to look at septic treatment, sewage treatment, or cluster systems, or infrastructure to manage stormwater runoff, or agricultural legacy, all these things. And we put together a board of experts, biologists and geologists and hydrogeologists and engineer. It's a small 5-person board that will review these applications, and Janice has done the yeoman's share of working with that board and putting in the process in place, the application process, so that we can also measure success. It's not enough to simply say, I got a great project, but we want to be able to vet it so that we have a better understanding of what good we are accomplishing with that money, being responsible to the taxpayer with that money. Even though, in a sense, it's not taxpayer money, it's transfer tax.
It's just a different tax.
It's a different kind of tax, right? So.
Right.
But we're really cognizant of that, and she's done a great job, and I should commend you for that publicly. That you're, some of the applications are now on CTV. You can watch.
Have we got a few of these in the ground at this point?
Not yet. Right now we had the application. We decided that the best way to approach it, and obviously this could change, but we thought to create a competitive process. So there was no sense of like,
Well, actually, on the sanitary systems.
Oh, I'm sorry, the sanitary
The
systems,
sanitary systems,
absolutely.
do we have a few of those now,
Yes.
these
Yes.
nitrogen removing sanitary systems?
There are sanitary systems in the ground now. There are funds encumbered while people wind their way through the health department to get their permits, because it's a reimbursement
So
process.
how many have been approved, or how many have been installed at this point?
I think at this point almost 50,
Okay.
50 systems.
And are we getting positive feedback? Are they working as
Yeah,
promised?
I think I'm going to update you because I think it's a little more than,
Oh,
than
I'm
50.
sorry.
But I'm sorry. I just said I think it's a little more than 50. I
Okay.
believe.
Are they working? Are they
They
doing
seem
what
to
they're
be
supposed to
working,
do?
yeah,
Okay.
as far as I've heard.
We haven't
I mean,
heard any complaints or.
I know the county is looking at some other systems, so there might be some more choices soon for people.
Well, you would expect that the technologies would allow for more systems to get in place. We're also looking at ways to make that easier. We originally wanted to incentivize homeowners to do this. So the first stage of the law was to do it for new construction and substantial reconstruction. But as an incentive, also, other people who want to do this voluntarily, as you had mentioned, that's available for them as well. But there comes a time when we need to start moving forward. So we have this legacy issue of all the toilets that have been flushed over the last 50 years, but also what we can do in our base.
So
there's lots
basically
of
what you're
programs.
saying is that if a house, let's say, is fairly far from the bay or harbor, not within that 2-year travel time, but let's say within a 30-year travel time, a toilet flushed 20 years ago, that nitrogen hasn't even reached the bay yet.
Right,
Correct.
still traveling.
It's
And
still traveling.
And we
So-
still have a
So
rough.
things may get worse before they get better, based upon all the new houses that have been built within the last 30 years.
There's a potential for that. I mean, it's a very hard thing to measure. The county's doing the sub-watershed study, so that's a very hard thing to measure. So, but we know that this is a long-term thing. There's no silver bullet. We're not
Sure.
going to solve this problem overnight, but we're going to solve it on many fronts.
There's lots of different approaches to solving it. And you were talking about other water quality projects we're about to and how we're reviewing those. But I know Dr. Gobler at SOMAS, Stony Brook School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences, he's been promoting all kinds of different things, from using seaweeds to pull nitrogen out, to these permeable reactive barriers is something you mentioned, but all kinds of different kind of approaches to.
Well, there's
You've
lots
talked
of
about exchanging water and things like that.
bay seawater exchange.
So
you
there's
know,
more
in
than one way to
areas-
approach the issue.
Right. I mean, like in Bellport, the area where there was a breach that was kept open, there have been significant changes in the biology for the better in those areas where that happened. So bay seawater flushing is an important, I believe is certainly an important thing. So you can actually see the effects where Shinnecock Inlet is. You get, very heavily oxygenated water. It's very clean and fresh. Where we grow oysters in those areas, we have spat programs where we grow oysters. It's an intrinsic part of one of the solutions with solving a lot of this issue.
Aquaculture, thank you.
The agriculture.
Aquaculture is
But where
potentially
you
a great
have
way
that
of
fresh,
filtering it out.
yeah, absolutely.
The algae, yeah.
And where you have that seawater exchange, you get high growth and you get rapid growth. In areas where it's more stagnant and you don't have that, you get a lot of oxygen depletion for a variety of reasons, but you don't get the motion and movement of water that you should have. So we're also looking at tidal gate systems, and they have the added benefit of being able to generate power. Everything's going to be aesthetically correct, but that's something to definitely look at as a coastal community. How we can aid in having our bay hydrology, our bay systems flush better. You were talking about Chris Goebler's. He had shared with me a map as a model of the particulates and how they move throughout the bay system depending on the tides. And you watch these particles. Let's say they were released here, they start to move slowly. You see the beat of the tides like a heartbeat. But the slow progress that some of these things make is very revealing. It's indicative of the issue that we have where we have poor seawater, bay seawater exchange. So I think that is actually a critical
I think a classic
issue.
example is in Shinnecock Bay, where you have the inlet and the canal, and you have really good water quality over there. But as you travel west, past the Pongpog Bridge to other areas like Tiana Bay or all the way to Quantock Bay, the further you go from that inlet, in general, the worse the water quality.
Yeah, I mean it's a compounding problem. We lose eelgrass. We get high turbidity in the water. The eelgrass doesn't get enough light. The eelgrass dies. It's a compounding problem, and it's devastated some of our shellfish areas. The DEC has set aside areas that can't be harvested in. We're trying to promote aquaculture as an alternative to that.
Have we seen some of these areas come back? Have we seen some positive
We're
signs?
actually starting to see in some areas in the western Shinnecock, part of Shinnecock, where we're looking at clam populations and eelgrass populations moving north. For the first time. So there are some good signs, but there's also the natural ebb and flow of algal blooms and other things that have always occurred. So time will tell.
So Janice, let's jump back to what we're talking about in terms of how we're reviewing proposals for water quality projects.
Sure. Just generally, the water quality improvement program had a project plan that you might recall, which bucketed these kinds of projects you're talking about into three categories, which are reduction, remediation, and restoration. So we like to look at all these projects through that kind of lens, so we understand what kind of project we're dealing with. And what I was mentioning earlier was that we on the committee made a decision that the best way to approach how to manage these projects was to create a competitive process where there would be a period of time, and we hope to do this multiple times a year. We just are at the end of the first round, and that is that we would open up a funding round and put out a call for projects. People such as villages, homeowners associations, any scientific organization may wish to propose a project that fits into one of those categories. Reduction being the primary goal right now is to try to find all these ways, various methods to reduce. And in that project plan, we have multiple different technologies that Cape Cod really was where it all began, where they were able to identify projects that had high likelihood of success. So we borrowed a lot of them from them, although we knew about most of them from our own efforts here. And so this project plan, so this project period, we had put out an open call, and that way that you as the town supervisor and town board will be able to see each kind of project up against one another. So you don't, say, well, if we fund this, we don't know what's coming next. So each round has its grouping of projects that would, for the most part, for lack of a better term, kind of compete against one another. But in this case, none of them that we've gotten so far have, outweigh one another in the sense that one wouldn't be eligible than another. They're all really good, solid projects and mostly they have to deal with what John was saying, dealing with stormwater, first line of defense, putting in the infrastructure to stop stormwater that carries pathogens and other debris, pesticides, fertilizers straight to a water body, and that happens. So putting in the infrastructure to capture that water and settle out the solids that are holding those different the particulates that are noxious to a water body, that is important. So the stormwater infrastructure improvements, drainage, wastewater improvements, that sort of thing. So the committee took a long time to look at the projects, rate the projects, go over them with the applicants themselves to kind of make suggestions on how they can improve their projects. And now finalizing our recommendations to the town board, who will then decide, on this funding round. And then once we go through that and encumber the money and complete the process, we'll start it again and open up a new funding round. And we'll do that hopefully at least twice a year, or maybe more, as we get to a point where it's a well-oiled machine and we understand what we're looking at and keep going. And so if you look at it as a sort of pie chart, this water quality fund will, you can start seeing how you're allocating those funds. Certain amount to rebates, a certain amount to these projects, a certain amount to other types of infrastructure projects that the town may wish to undertake. So, and as it shapes up, you'll be able to see, and the public will be able to see how this money is being allocated, and then we'll be having monitoring results of how these various technologies are matching up.
I also wanted to mention that, it was really cognizant when we started this process that we set a tone for future boards, that this water quality board is independent, and it was one of the hardest things I had to do, because I had to remove myself from the process. As much as I wanted to be part of that, I felt that as a board member, ultimately these applications will be presented to us as a board, and I didn't think it's right to influence that process at all. And that was really hard, as Janice can attest, because it was very hard for me to stay away. But I think it was important to do that. One of the complaints, if you will, for lack of a better term, originally the Water Quality Fund was proposed as 80% use just for septic replacements.
Yes, replacements.
And we realized early on that the problem is not just septic. As I alluded to, there's a lot of other issues. So we argued strongly that we should be able to use these funds for other things, infrastructure. But by the same token, it sort of offers an opportunity for special interest to have their particular projects and dabble their way into that. And I felt very strongly that shouldn't happen. So
Sure.
The process now is I think running really well, and I watch it happen. So this board is going to get their first round of applications. You'll get a detailed report from Janice, and based on the recommendations are made, ultimately the decision still rests with the board. But you're going to be able to make an informed decision. Not everybody has the same knowledge share, but you'll be able to get that information directly about the scientific validity of a particular
Good. So
project.
with this first round of funding, you have seen some interesting proposals have come through?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've seen them for the first time on CTV. I hadn't seen them, so I was actually really pleasantly surprised. It was nice to see that all the work that we'd put into this process actually materialized in a really good way.
Well, we asked CTV to tape our conversations with the applicants so that it was fully transparent.
I haven't seen that.
And so, well, we had planned to give you the recommendation letters and the links and all that, so before we had our meeting too, so you have all of that.
Well,
But John
we'll
got
have
it,
to
you know,
But
see.
I-
sneak
no, I-
preview. No, it's
No,
been on
probably,
TV.
It's probably on our CTV
It is, it is.
YouTube channel
Yes,
too.
that's
so
where
it
it's
may
been.
be, yeah.
We'll have to ask them to put it up there because I'd like to see that as well. That should
Yes,
be interesting.
absolutely.
So if people want to get involved and they want to help improve the quality of our bays and harbors by upgrading the sanitary system, they should call your office, and I hope they do. So, you know, if you're interested and you're watching, please make that phone call. And thank you for watching Talk of the Town. We'll see you next time. Janice, thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
John,
Thank you. Thank you.